Good morning and welcome to the viewing and listening audience to the 16th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. This is the committee's first hearing with stakeholders pursuant to its examination of the regulation and administration of public and private early childhood care and education institutions in Trinidad and Tobago. Members of the public are invited to submit their comments and questions via the Parliament social media platforms, YouTube channel ParlView, or via Facebook or Twitter. The stakeholders before us today include 1, the Ministry of Education, 2, the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, and 3, the Tobago House of Assembly, Division of Education, Research and Technology. I'm the committee's chairman, Paul Richards. I'd like to invite my colleagues from the committee to introduce themselves, starting with Member Nakid.
Good morning to all and welcome. Looking forward to a productive session.
Thank you. Member Singh.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, colleagues. I am Avinash Singh, member. I'm looking forward to a very productive session. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Sinanan. Mr. Sinanan is with us. He may be having some technical issues. Member Ford, who's also here, and Member Mohit, who's also here. There are 2 members who are not with us for reasons that they had previous engagements.
I'm here.
Oh, go ahead, Member Ford. Sorry.
Right. What? Yes, good morning. Esmond Ford, member of the committee.
Thank you. Members, Minister Penelope Beckles and also Member Monroe are unable to be with us today. We thank you for joining us. And of course, we thank our Secretariat for their continuous support. The inquiry today has 3 main objectives. 1, to assess the regulatory framework which governs the early childhood care and educational institutions in Trinidad and Tobago. 2, to assess the performance of ECCE centers for the period 2017 to 2022, inclusive of systems implemented to combat learning loss experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. 3, to assess the health and safety compliance of ECCE centers. And 4, to assess the ECCE curriculum in relation to preparation of children for primary school. Of course, we're looking at both public and private ECC centers in Trinidad and Tobago. We have 3 entities before us today. We will start with the first entity, the Ministry of Education. Can the lead please introduce yourself and your team? And you can also deliver 2-minute opening remarks this time. Education Ministry.
Good morning. I am Dr. Peter Smith, Chief Education Officer, Ministry of Education. I'll allow my team members to introduce themselves.
Good morning. Carol Bagwinden, Director, ECC Division.
Good morning. Michelle Collins, Research Officer, ECC Division.
Good morning. Susan Gopal Silval, ECC Consultant.
Good morning. Elizabeth Courtney, Program Coordinator for Silval.
So I'll proceed with my opening now, Chairman, members of the JSC, representatives of Silval, THA, and Children's Authority, members of the public. From birth to age 5, a child's brain develops more and more rapidly than at any other time in life. And while genetics play an important role, scientific research has made it clear that the quality of a child's experiences in the first few years of life, positive or negative, shapes how their brain develops. These experiences have lasting impact on their health and ability to learn and succeed in school and in life. This echoes UNICEF's position that quality pre-primary education is the foundation of a child's journey. Every stage of education that follows relies on its success. The Ministry of Education is aware of these developments, and hence from a modest pilot project which began in La Pastora Community Center in Santa Cruz in 1970, the ECCE sector has grown to 143 centers in Trinidad, 12 in Tobago, 57 centers managed by Serval, and approximately 631 private institutions. It is envisioned that the amendment to the Education Act would provide greater governance of the ECCE sector, which would ensure adherence to the provision of quality services. The Ministry of Education is committed to the provision of high-quality early childhood care and education services in partnership with Serval and the various denominational boards. Visits to such centers reveal facilities that are well secured and maintained, outfitted with age-appropriate teaching and learning materials, furniture, restrooms, and large spaces that admit natural light and air. It is through play. Children are provided with opportunities to explore, problem solve, engage in critical thinking, as well as the development of many other skills, attitudes, and dispositions. All of this is fostered through a strong community spirit. The Ministry of Education takes this opportunity to thank the committee for its examination of the state of the regulation and administration of the public and private early childhood institutions in Trinidad and Tobago and looks forward to the questions. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. We move now to the officials from the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. My understanding is that Mrs. Elizabeth Lewis, Deputy Director, Legal and Regulatory Services, acting, will deliver the opening remarks and introduce her team. Mrs. Lewis.
Certainly. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Good morning to members of the THA. Very good morning to members of the Ministry of Education, the viewing and the listening public. As indicated, Chair, I am here representing the director who is unavoidably absent this morning. With me is Mr. Marlon Bascom, who is going to ably respond to questions asked by the JSC. As a Children's Authority, we are very pleased to be a part of this discussion, having the responsibility for dealing with children, the nation's children. ECCE is certainly part of the wider scope of children. And so the Children's Authority is looking forward to that engagement and improving the lives of children in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lewis. We move now to the officials of the Tobago House of Assembly, Division of Education, Research and Technology. I'm presuming that Ms. Ann Second may be the person speaking as lead. Is that accurate? You're still muted. Assembly, you're muted. Tobago House of Assembly, you are muted. Can a person who's acting as lead? Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Good morning. Quite sorry about that. Yes, so on behalf of the Tobago House of Assembly's Division of Education, Research and Technology, we are extremely pleased to be here to partner with all of the stakeholders as we discuss the way forward with the regulations and administration of public and private early childhood institutions in Trinidad and Tobago. As our colleagues from the ministry have indicated, we are quite ready to have the discussions and make reference to any questions that you have to clarify anything. Our primary concern would be the finalizing of the process of regularizing the ECCE teachers and including them into that Education Act. Because without it, and the process began since 2005, without it, we do not have the teeth that we need to regularize, particularly the private institutions. And that is how it is in Tobago in particular. So we're really happy to be here and to participate in the discussion. My colleague with me is the ECCE manager, Ms. Lorraine Igu, and I will allow her to just introduce herself.
Well, I'm Lorraine George Igu, Early Childhood Manager, Tobago House of Assembly, Division of Education. The pleasure is ours to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you all. Welcome once again. We'll start our questioning with the Ministry of Education. We will then go to the Children's Authority, and we will also be questioning our colleagues from Tobago. Let me start with the Education Ministry and Dr. Smith. One of the reasons we wanted this inquiry is because children who fall into the category of early childhood, defined from birth to 8 years old, are among the most vulnerable in society. Doing research for this inquiry, there had been white and green papers and policy documents, drafted policy documents from as early as the early 90s, 2004-05, iterations in 2012, 2013, 2014. But we are still absent of specific legislation to deal with the regulation of early childhood centers in Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Smith indicated earlier on, I think 114 centers, government centers in Trinidad, 12 in Tobago, and 631 privately run and public-private partnership early childhood care centers throughout Trinidad and Tobago without the legal regulatory framework in place that should be adhered to protect and maintain standards. So I know it's in process. The ministry submission, Dr. Smith, indicated that the Chief Parliamentary Council, CPC, with support from the legal unit, is in the process of amending the Education Act with a view to creating comprehensive legal framework for the governance of the entire education sector, including ECCE. Given the ministry has indicated the pace of the revision of the Education Act has hindered the ministry in implementing initiatives, what is the status of the amendments with specific reference to the governance of early childhood care centers in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yes. So thank you very much, Chair. At this point in time, the Ministry of Education is in constant contact with the AG's office, and we are seeing light at the end of the tunnel, to use that phrase. We do expect that that document will be finalized sooner rather than later.
You used two euphemisms there that told me nothing, with the greatest of respect. Light at the end of the tunnel could be a very long tunnel, and soonest means absolutely nothing in the context of delivery of a particular project. Could you be more specific, please?
Okay, so as I indicated, we are in touch with the AG's office, Chair, and we do anticipate the finalization and submission of that document. In terms of the specific time frame, I am unable to give you that at this point in time.
Do you get a sense it's this year, next year, given the importance of this kind of legislation in the governance of and maintenance of standards where a very vulnerable group is concerned? You indicated in your opening that there are 631 private public partnership centers and private centers, 114 government centers in Trinidad and 12 in Tobago. And let me just go a bit further in terms of your submission. The Education Ministry's center existing and planned, together with the private providers, cater for approximately 33,226 3 to 4 year old children. 33,000. So without, for the academic year 2013 to 2014, a total of 30,884 children were enrolled in the ECCE sector. And in 2011, the National Census put 3 to 4 age group population at almost 40,000, specifically 38,131 children. And as you would know, without the governance it is more difficult to regulate the standards that apply to that vulnerable group. So is there a timeline, an envisioned timeline when this legislation or the amendment to the legislation will come to provide stronger legislative teeth to protecting these children?
Right. So, Chair, we do anticipate the finalization of that document this year.
This year?
This year.
Oh, I had to work together, boy. Wow. Thank you. Next question. You indicated in your opening that the ministry visits the centers to ensure that there is compliance at some level, even with the present framework in place under the Education Act, governed by the Education Ministry, to monitor standards of care, etc. How many of these centers have been visited? When have they been visited? And is there a schedule for visits of these centers, government run and also private centers? Because 631 is a lot. Plus.
So Chair, I'll ask the Director of ECC, Mrs. Carol Bagwanden, to respond.
Good morning again, Chair. So our government-assisted centers, they are monitored by an assigned administrator. That person would check on those centers on a daily basis. We also have field officers assigned to the serval centers. As per the private centers, most of these centers are run from persons' private homes. As such, we reach out to persons, and once they are willing to allow us to visit their private homes where their centers are being managed, we go in and we lend support, reference to curriculum delivery. If we may see anything pertaining to the standards, the quality of standards, we provide guidance so as to bring them up to that quality existence.
All right, so just for my clarity and the members of the public, is it that these private centers are mandated to be registered? How do they come into existence?
Yes, centers are in keeping with that Education Act. They are required, providers are required to register their centers with the Ministry of Education. However, over the past, we have noticed that centers are cropping up without being registered, and hence the reason we are now in the process of addressing same.
When you say let's stay with the registered ones. What are the criteria for registration?
So in order to be registered, the provider must get approval from Water and Sewerage Authority, the Electrical Inspectorate from the Public Utilities Commission, Trinidad and Tobago Fire Services, the Regional Health Authority, and Ministry of Planning, Town and Country Planning Division. They then submit their approvals to the Ministry of Education. Personnel from the Ministry of Education will go in, inspect the premises. Once they are in compliance, they are issued a registration certificate.
Now, those are the statutory requirements. Are there training, qualification, and educational level and medical professional on-site requirements, because you're dealing with children, for those centers to be registered by the Education Ministry to ensure that the children under their care are receiving a particular standard of care?
Yes, persons must meet the qualification standards. However, at this time, we are taking steps to tighten that even further by reviewing our guidelines for registration of ECC private institutions, throughout the country, and we would be willing to submit more information in writing once you approve.
What are the general criteria for persons working in these centers?
I would ask the research officer at this time to respond to this question.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chair. In terms of the general requirements, we do ask that persons in these private institutions have trained and qualified persons. And when we say trained and qualified, we mean that they've gotten certificates in early childhood care and education from an accredited tertiary institution. In terms of health, sorry, in terms of health.
So you said you asked for it. Is it mandatory for their registration? Because asking for it is one thing.
Yes, that is required for their registration process. In terms of health requirements, we don't have health requirements in terms of persons needing to have first aid qualifications, that kind of thing. But we do work in partnership with the Ministry of Health. If we see that there are, or public health rather, if there are schools that are not meeting basic quality standards in terms of the health aspect, and they would actually go in with us, do a site visit, and public health will then make recommendations to the private institutions that they will then have to comply with.
Are there any health requirements at all? Because earlier when I read that there are 40,000 or so children who meet the criteria for early childhood care in Trinidad and Tobago from these centers, 600 and plus are private institutions. And we all know how prone children are to medical emergencies sometimes and challenges. What happens if there is an emergency at a center where there's no qualified health person or no protocol in place to respond quickly to that, to save that child's life if that child's life is threatened?
Can you repeat your question, please, Chair?
The question is, in the absence of having a mandatory trained healthcare professional on site at some of these childhood care centers as part of their registration requirement, what happens if there is a medical emergency with a child at these centers? What is the ministry's guidelines where that is concerned in the absence of having a mandatory healthcare professional on site?
We do have within our policy document, we do have an aspect that speaks to health and safety. And so all schools must have a policy in terms of policy procedures that they would have in place if there's any medical emergencies. For example, if a child has an issue, they know the teachers and owners of the school know that they must contact the parent immediately. If it's something that requires ambulance or other emergency services, contact the ambulance service, notify the parent. A teacher will go with the child. So all of that is actually within our standards for regulating early childhood care and education under health and safety.
Thank you. Earlier on, Dr. Smith indicated, or it could be your other colleague, that the centers that, and I'm paraphrasing here, allow you access to inspect are inspected. That suggests to me that because of the lack of the regulatory framework with the legislation, that they don't have to allow you access. What happens if you are denied access to peruse and inspect the premises to ensure compliance and standards?
Chair, I will take that question if you may.
Please.
So in a case like that, we reach out to the Ministry of Health so that we could get the public health inspectors to go into the premises. Because again, yes, we have seen it happen on many occasions.
And in terms of the issue you raised earlier on where you said there are more centers popping up that are not registered and we can assume that they may not be compliant at some level. What happens where those are concerned? What's the ministry's response?
Again, we make contact with them because we have a good networking going on where persons would communicate to us if they see such centers. We do our research on our database so that we will know whether or not the centers are registered, and we reach out to the private providers and educate them as per the importance of having their centers registered.
Based on your inspections, you say you inspect regularly the centers that you have identified earlier on. What is your biggest, or what are your biggest concerns based on what you've seen as issues that are most prominent that may pose a risk to children at these centers? What are the issues that you may have identified that keep coming up earlier and earlier that we should be concerned about and really vigilant about?
Chair, I may ask for clarity here because I mentioned our public government-assisted and civil centers are monitored regularly. However, it is not as regular with the private institutions. Which do you refer?
Okay, let's start with the private institutions. Because those are the ones to me that will have less of a compliance tendency, if I may be so bold.
It may vary. Sometimes we see inadequate toilets for the children. So, for example, at our government-assisted civil centers, when you visit those centers, the washrooms would be a 1:10 ratio. Every one child-sized washroom is to be used by 10 children. Adults and children are not supposed to be using the same washrooms, so you will also have for adults. At the private institutions, we don't see that. Sometimes lighting may be poor. Again, qualification and the high turnover of staffing within those centers are some of the commonalities we see running across when we visit centers.
And the government-assisted or government partnership centers, what are some of the challenges you see there?
I would not really say challenges, but we always have room for improvement in keeping with best practice. So it may be based on, because we follow the same requirements and we follow the standards. So sometimes it may just be some of the materials, we may need to switch out the materials that currently being used because the children may have perfected those materials. So again, switching out of materials, the way sometimes how a particular activity or activities within the curriculum is delivered, but it's not really challenges per se, but always for areas for improvement and modification.
Just before I open the floor to my colleagues on the committee, is there a risk management system in place to prioritize the schools? You identified that the private schools are the ones that sometimes have the concerns from the ministry's perspective. So with these 631 centers, I think it's that, yeah, 631 public-private partnership centers and the civil centers. Is there a risk management protocol that the ministry has to say, well, we visited 400 and we've red flagged 20 for more regular checks or for higher risk management intervention where that is concerned?
I will refer to this question to my research officer, who is the champion leading this type of data for centers.
Thank you.
Chair, at this time, there isn't a risk management intervention, but we are always supporting the private centers in terms of training, ensuring that they understand the various policies as it relates to the Ministry of Education with reference to quality standards and the curriculum. As we move forward, the Ministry of Education is working with the private institutions as it pertains to the registration of their centers. And this is definitely something that I've taken a note of because I think it would be something that would be beneficial in terms of ensuring that they reach the quality standards that we expect them to.
So you're saying you are going to
yes.
design a risk management protocol?
Yes, that is the aim coming out of the registration drive in terms of the long term, because part of the monitoring and evaluation procedure that we want to implement, this should be a part of that if we are to ensure that all centers are meeting quality standards.
Thank you. Members, any members Singh, Ford, Sinana, Naked, the floor is open to your questions. Have there any been centers shut down from the ministry because of lack of compliance or an unwillingness to be compliant or posing risks to their cares?
The Public Health Inspectorate is responsible for shutting down centers for not meeting health and safety standards. At this time, we, at the Ministry of Education, we don't shut down centers.
Are you aware of any centers that have been shut down?
Pardon?
Are you aware of any centers? Because I'm sure they'd bring it to your attention.
In the past, not recently, but in the years gone by, yes.
Okay. Member Naked, any questions?
Good morning. Yes, I do have one question. It's related, of course, to the Ministry of Education, because the Children's Authority, they have lamented the fact that Section 5 hasn't been proclaimed, and they are unable to monitor these childhood care centers. I am asking, does that fall under the purview of the Ministry of Education to monitor, since the Section 5 Act has not been proclaimed yet, and that excludes the Children's Authority from monitoring those childhood care centers? Does that fall within the purview of the Ministry of Education to monitor? Be careful of that word, monitor, before something actually takes place. Does that fall under the purview of the Ministry of Education?
Good morning, Mr. Naked. So Ministry of Education is responsible for monitoring early childhood centers, so catering for children 3 to 5.
And how often are those childhood care centers monitored by the Ministry of Education, since we've had numerous complaints?
Earlier on, I made mention of our government-assisted centers being monitored on a daily basis by assigned center administrators or serval field officers, as well as ECC officers. However, at the private level, because most of the centers operate from within people's homes, we are actually going into private spaces, and as such, we reach out to them, and once they agree to allow us in, definitely we go in and provide guidance and the support.
Okay, then the natural follow-up question would be, if there are complaints against a private childhood care center and they do not allow you entry, what is the next move?
We go to Public Health, the Ministry of Health, through the Public Health Inspectorate, as well as based on the nature of the report, we also get the police involved.
Okay, and how expeditious would that be? Because we are talking probably the danger of a child. How long would that take? What is that process involved?
Not long at all, sir. As recent as 2020, we had a very major incident where within a day we had all parties involved and engaged in an investigation.
Without calling the name of the institution, what kind of incident would that be?
Death of a child.
At a private healthcare center?
Yes.
And what was the response? Because is it something that was publicized, or is it something, or I think I remember something recently at a pool situation. Would that be the one you're referring to?
Yes, sir, it was.
And with that said, would that center have been visited before to ensure that the surroundings were safe for a child?
Prior to, we did not know of their existence because it was an unregistered institution.
So those are the ones that have the greatest risks, obviously.
Most definitely.
Would you have a sense of how many unregistered private centers there are in the country? I mean, they're unregistered, so by nature, it's difficult, but you might be getting information about centers that are popping up, as you indicated earlier on, that need to be monitored.
We have been getting, and again, we rely on the community to reach out to us as well. We publish on our social media pages and our website, the centers coming very soon from our policy, our draft document for the registration of private institutions. All of this would be public knowledge, but we rely on persons to also reach out to us because sometimes, again, institutions may prop up without us knowing of their existence.
This may be a no-brainer question. It's against the law to have an institution with children without registration with the Education Ministry.
Yes, it is.
So what happens if an institution is taking in children? Because in some cases, people are doing it in their homes.
Yes, they are.
So what's the ministry's response to that sort of scenario? It may not be advertised. It may be just someone saying, I have a home. I'm looking to provide this service and make some money. And I'm taking 15 children in my home, which is a common practice. Auntie in the neighborhood takes children kind of thing. What happens in those sorts of scenarios? Are those the reports that you are hoping for from the public?
Oh. Okay, so Chair, again, we are taking steps towards addressing those right now, and we have a draft document. We are in the final stages of having it finalized right and approved right now for use. That would tighten up unregistered centers. Again, we continue to educate John public about the importance of having their centers or their institutions registered and meeting those standards.
When you say a draft document, is this the overall draft education policy paper inclusive of parameters for ECC center, or is this a specific document related to these unregistered centers?
A specific document tailored to the registration and operation of private educational institutions throughout the country from ECCE to secondary.
This is an amendment to a document. It can't be a new document.
So Chair, if I may, this is a separate document which would regulate the registration of private schools, including ECCE centers.
I ask the question because I'm presuming that, is it that there is no policy document now related to the registration of ECC centers, private?
Yes,
there is, Chair, but what we would have done at this point in time is to really develop one comprehensive document that will cater for the proper registration of schools at this time.
That word proper bothers me. Member Singh, do you have any questions? Member Nakul, are you complete or do you have other questions?
One more question, Chair.
Go ahead, please.
Do you have any statistics, any data available as to the number of incidents that you described with that unfortunate, the death of that infant with the pool? Do you have any statistics available? How many of those incidents occur at these unregistered private homes as opposed to those that are monitored or registered by the Ministry of Education?
Not, yes, only for the reported incidents. Again, major reported infractions, very low at this time. For the last academic year, we've only had 2 incidents on our records.
Report at the unregistered private homes, sorry? At the unregistered private homes?
Private ECCE centers.
The unregistered ones?
Yes, the two incidents, it would have been those centers were unregistered.
So clearly those are the points of greatest concern. Member Sinan, I think you have a question.
Yes, I do, Chair. Good morning, all. It is illegal to have a home or school operating that is not registered, right? And we do understand there are several schools that operate in Trinidad and Tobago. Shouldn't we then be going on a sort of educational campaign to parents and so that, before you decide to place your child in one of these schools or institutions, that you should request to see some registration approvals or something like that, so that people can be, more comfortable where they place their children. I say that because a lot of the parents outside there may not know that the school is not registered, and maybe an educational program to inform the parents about asking for that registration approval before you register your child in one of these institutions. It's just a suggestion, and if there's anything like that in place.
And just to add to Member Sutherland's point, is there a requirement for a display of a registration document by these private institutions?
Yes, Chair, exactly.
Yes to both questions. Yes, your registration certificate must be displayed in a prominent location. And yes, we have tips for parents what to look for when you are registering your child at any institution. So we definitely have both available, but again, as we go forward in the year, we're going to see us again once more revising and having more strategies in place to educate parents about looking for what to look for when you are registering your child at an institution.
Okay. Just two comments from coming in from the public. Member Singh, you have a question?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Just a suggestion. Sometimes we do have a policy and a procedure, but not all the time it is actually communicated to the people who needs to get the information. I would suggest that you go on a drive, a more stringent drive, to educate the parents and the population about what to look for. Because I'm certain that a lot of parents will look for the opportunity to place a child closer to home, somewhere where it's convenient. And that whole thought of that registration and so slips through. And maybe what you should have on your registration display is also a number that they can call to verify that these certificates are authentic and the school is actually up to date based on your last inspection and so. So the public can call your authority and get information before they make that crucial decision or critical decision as to I'm going to send my child to this institution. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
Yes, so all of that in place as we move forward and roll out before the start of the new academic year.
Member Singh?
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning to members of the Ministry of Education. Good morning, colleagues. I have a question in relation to this incidents that we've been seeing. I just want to digress for a couple of seconds, but it's a real challenge for me living in Central. I'm seeing a lot of non-national children, which fall in the category of the 3 to 5 years that are not in school. Do we have any statistics of non-national children that are enrolled or should be enrolled, or what is the policy regarding these children that for some reason they are not in schools? I don't know, what is the policy with respect to non-nationals being in ECC centers?
So good morning, Sasananan, and what we will have to do, if permitted, please allow us to submit a written response to your question, because that element falls outside of just the Ministry of Education. It also involves the immigration authorities. And your concern is definitely noted.
Thank you, Chair. I'm comfortable with that. And the reason I'm bringing that up, is because education starts at home, and for when children are not in schools, I mean, let me just give you an example. I went to my garden recently, and I actually saw some children, they probably no older than 3 years, 4 years old. And they were actually picking picking fruits and whatnot. So definitely they are around, and they can find themselves in activities which, when you are taught, when you bring home a pencil that does not belong to you. In my opinion, that is where the criminal element starts, when you are told, well, you can go by the neighbor and pick their mangoes without asking. And this is a real challenge coming from central Trinidad, that I'm seeing more children on the streets that are not, gainfully in academic facilities. So I take that on board, Chairman, but it's a real issue that we have to also consider. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Member Ford. While Member Ford comes back on, I just got 2 messages, Education Ministry, from members of the public looking on. One is regarding a report made by someone about a private early childhood care center, which is at what they consider a dangerous location at an intersection. And it is not unique, because I've seen them myself moving around in them, and they indicated that this is a registered private institution that had gotten approval at a busy intersection. And 2, another one related to a center catering for about 25, 27 children with 1 bathroom, which was reported, and it's still operating 2 years later. So what's the response to those scenarios?
Chair, we would have to do some more investigation reference to the private center that would have been that is operating at the intersection. What we are also finding is during the registration process, it is indicated that relocation nullifies your registration status. However, what we are seeing is persons relocating without re-registering, because again, when you get approval from WASA, Town and Country, Electrical Inspectorate, Fire Services, etc., it is for that specific location. But again, persons are relocating without having their centers reassessed. So that is one area we are also looking at. As per the second point raised with the 1 washroom and the one for the persons to use, we are asking that persons submit to us via ecce@moe.gov.tt your complaint, and again, it will be investigated.
Just before we move to the Children's Authority, final question, unless the committee members have any other questions for the Education Ministry. You said you are seeing, which means it's been documented, situations where centers are changing locations without authorization, given their first registration approvals. But you indicated earlier on that there was only 1 center or a couple of centers shut down. So how can these centers that have come to your knowledge, that have moved to locations unapproved, continue under those circumstances? And if centers are moving location without authorization, what is in place for personnel changes at centers that do not fall within the criteria of qualified persons changing, and also not informing the Education Ministry and becoming uncompliant compared to when they first registered with John Doe, Miss Doe, X Doe as employees who are qualified, etc. What is the monitoring process for those changes, those dynamic changes within centers that may be registered and qualify at one stage, but their circumstances are changed without advising the Education Ministry?
So once more, we reach out once we are made aware. We reach out, we provide that technical support to have the issues addressed that that may have been raised. So again, we continue to reach out to private providers. We continue to stress the importance of sticking within the required guidelines. But again, public health is definitely involved in that aspect of it for getting them, when they get a compliance notice, personnel would go back and check on the institutions. But currently, as it is, public health inspectors would be the ones to say, okay, your doors must be closed for non-compliance at this time.
Is the ministry generally comfortable with the level of compliance at private ECC centers in Trinidad and operating within safe parameters?
To a fair extent.
What does that mean?
Approximately, if we want to really quantify, we could say approximately, it could be approximately, and again, this is a guesstimate, about 50-50 or persons
so
in
approximately 50% are compliant.
Yes.
That is of great concern to me.
Yes, it is.
That means about 20,000 children are in centers that may be uncompliant and unsafe. That is not the benchmark we should be operating at, but that's for a different discussion. Member Naked, thank you, Education Ministry. We appreciate your information. Member Naked, go ahead with the Children's Authority, please.
Yes, but Chair, can I pose one more question, please?
Absolutely. Go ahead, please. Yes.
If I don't know what's missing, but I understand from the Chair and Member Sinanan and yourselves, your good selves, that it is illegal to have these early childhood care centers unregistered. I heard the word illegal. So the question has to be, once they have been identified as being unregistered, how long does it take for these centers to be closed down and these people charged if it is illegal? I don't know if I'm missing something here. Maybe you can clarify.
Mr. Naked, that is within the Education Act that yes, all institutions providing educational services must be registered. Again, centers are popping up without being registered. At this time, it is not within the purview of the Ministry of Education to shut them down, but with Public Health Inspectorate, once it is brought to our attention and we visit, etc., violations, we get public health involved.
Do you follow up with public health to make sure that these centers are shut down?
Yes.
Thank you. Member Naked, Children's Authority. Please. Thank you, Education Ministry.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. The Children's Authority, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Chair, I cannot see who is I'm speaking with.
Is it Mrs. Lewis?
Yes, Chair.
She's on, Member Naked. Go ahead.
Okay, no, I see her. Well, before I get into the substantive part, I read the responses by the Children's Authority to the questions posed, and of course, it echoes what I mentioned earlier, that it was a major lament. It seems to me a major lament of the Children's Authority that Section 5 has not been proclaimed yet, and that therefore precludes you from monitoring these centers. Thereby, what comes to your attention are the complaints of abuse. So my point is, if the Children's Authority is unable, because of a lack of proclamation of that act, to monitor the centers. And thereby we can only have an intervention after an act has already been committed. I mean, how disconcerting is that to the people of Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, Member Mrs. Lewis can't answer that question. You have to ask her a question based on what her remit is.
Well,
she can't answer.
What is being done to ensure that you are able to monitor the situation before the abuse takes place? That is the obvious question then, Ms. Lewis.
Thank you for the question, Member Knockett. Just for some clarification, the Children's Authority under the section, part 5, which is sections 42 to 52A of the Children's Community Residences Foster Care Nurseries Act 4604. It calls for regulation, which is basically licensure of nurseries. As the Ministry of Education has rightly said, they are responsible for early childhood centers. Certainly, as you would have indicated, when we get a report, as we do Island or for any location of a child who is a victim of abuse, we take it through our normal process. So it goes in, it is investigated, a decision is made with respect to whether the child can remain in the space where the abuse is taking place, and if there is need for us to receive that child into care, and of course, moving forward into the involvement of the court. With respect to our prevention, we have a very public prevention program with respect to child abuse. So we do a number of Facebook engagements. We go out to the various places to conduct sensitizations with respect to child abuse. And so that sensitization is aimed at everybody, including early childhood centers.
I appreciate that, Mrs. Lewis. But as we know, the bureaucratic nature of any ministry, under any administration, I think the Children's Authority would be primarily placed. I mean, I know through my research that there are investigative units. I think the Children's Authority would be primarily placed, putting aside the bureaucracy, to so to speak, to better monitor these situations before the event actually occurs. I mean, you're talking about children between 3 and 6 and so forth. That could be life-ending psychological trauma that could take years to heal. So what we're looking for is preventative measures before the incident takes place. And I understand the bureaucracy of a ministry. So my question to you is, wouldn't the Children's Authority be better placed to monitor the situation before the actual abuse takes place?
Member Knockett, the Children's Authority would deal with children who are victims of abuse and neglect. Children who attend early childhood centers are not considered unless we get a report of an action taken against a child. These are normal children attending regularly. So it could be early childhood center, it could be a primary school, it could be a secondary. These are children attending normal school. And so with respect to the role of the Children's Authority, I would want us to be mindful that the Children's Authority cannot just go in. I mean, if we're invited, we go in and provide sensitization. But in terms of the monitoring, I would be quite concerned if the Children's Authority coming in to monitor, children who are not children of the state, who have been received into state care, which is different to children who are in children's homes. Children in children's homes are children received into state care for a situation of abuse, and they had to be removed. And so the authority must and will and are monitoring those children. But from the early childhood centers, and I think Ministry of Education would have clearly indicated, they are responsible for the monitoring. And as far as I heard, they are doing that.
Well, I know I've placed you in a difficult position to answer, But to me, I don't think that answer would be satisfactory to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I know the Ministry of Education has their job, but are you saying, therefore, that children at 3 to 6 are not as much at risk of abuse? Because I heard you said that at 3 to 6, there may not be so many, you said something that alluded to that there may not so many incidents at that age. Is that what you said?
Certainly not, Member Natkit. What I'm saying is it is a regular, early childhood centers are regular educational facilities. And just as I said, indicated earlier, in fact, like a primary school or a secondary school. So these are children attending schooling at their level. And so for the Children's Authority to be given that responsibility, it can be stretched to the Children's Authority, probably given that same responsibility for primary and secondary schools. So we are looking at the legislation, the draft legislation in respect of that at this point, to determine where the responsibility of the Children's Authority begins and ends. The legislation speaks to, and nurseries would be different to early childhood centers. So nurseries would cover birth to 3 years. These are young children, babies. And this was really the intention of the legislation, to focus on that core group of children who, I mean, it is well known, they are highly susceptible to abuse and neglect.
Okay, Mrs. Lewis, well, let me get into a substantive questioning. Your submission mentioned that the nursery gap analysis project was suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent closures of nurseries, and is to be revisited. Do you have any idea when will this project be revisited, resumed?
Unfortunately, not at this time, Member Nackett. We were quite advanced, nonetheless, in the research that we were doing, because we wanted to get an understanding of what was out there. Because, again, of that same confusion with nurseries as opposed to early childhood centers. We would have started in November, COVID. Of course, we know what happened with COVID in 2020. We have done, nonetheless, a preliminary report that speaks to some of what we would have found at this point. But to answer your question directly, we do not have a set date at which time we are going to continue with the research that we started.
Mrs. Lewis, your submission indicated that when children under 6 are removed from the custody of their parents, there may be delays in placement in a school due to the need for a transfer. How long on average does it take for a transfer to be finalized?
Member Nackett, if I may, I will ask my colleague, Mr. Bascom, to respond to this question.
Thank you.
Hi. Good morning, Member Nackett and everyone else on the panel. It may vary vastly in terms of the transfer process depending on the area of Trinidad and Tobago. So, but on average, it could take anywhere between 3 weeks to about 6 weeks to have that transfer completed.
And that length of time, is it because of the bureaucracy involved? Papers being transferred? Why is it so long?
Well, different things. Sometimes in the course of the school transfer, some of the documentation that may be needed from the child's family may not be available. That may include birth certificates, that may include immunization records or other health records and so on. And so some of the delay would be us at the authority seeking to get those documents or to duplicate those documents if they are not available. Sometimes it may involve applying again for those documents, either at the Ministry of Legal Affairs or through the various health centers or at the Ministry of Health to get immunization records and so on, which the schools need to have adequate records of the children. A lot of the time, that is the major issue, other than regular bureaucracy. But in some instances, it may be that the schools would not have space, and so we may be working with the ministry to find appropriate spaces for the children.
Okay, and when that happens, what quality assurance measures do you have in place to evaluate the tutorials being given to these kids?
Apologies, can you repeat?
what quality assurance measures do you have in place to evaluate the tutorials being given to these children?
At the various schools on the authority, we don't have those measures in place. We rely on the ministry and their schools in terms of their evaluation standards.
And how often do you get a report on that?
Well, on a case-by-case basis, there are instances where we may request information on the child depending on the nature of the case. Sometimes it would be, of course, at the end of the term, but periodically, once we are involved in a matter, our caseworkers, our children's services associates would be dispatched to engage and speak with the various teachers at the schools, the principals, and so on, to provide an overall picture in terms of what is happening with the child.
So, Mr. Bascom, I'm not casting in, but I would like to know. I would like just for clarity. So, is it a reactive measure as far as knowing about these quality assurance measures, or is it proactive? Do you go after the results of them, the data, or is it only if you have a report of a child being left behind or something like that?
I'm not sure I understand.
Remember, Naked, this is the Children's Authority. They are not reposed with the remit of curriculum and education. They are.
It's not about the curriculum. Sorry, Chairman. It's not about the curriculum. I'm just finding out if it's a proactive measure. It's not about that. If it's proactive or it's more reactive. Mr. Bascom stated that if they have a report, that they will investigate. So I'm asking, why is it not more proactive as to go after and make sure that the kids are getting the quality assurance measures for the tutorials? It's not about, I know it's not, they are not responsible for curriculum and that. It's just about what is the approach of the Children's Authority, because in the end, the children, they are responsible for the children. Mr. Bascom, if you'd like to take some time to give me a written response, I have no problem.
Member, if I may,
please do.
Question. Thank you, Chair. If I understand well, is it that you are speaking with respect to children who have come to the attention of the Children's Authority and who the Children's Authority has taken placement for at the schools, at the various schools?
That's exactly what I'm referring to. Yes.
Okay. So those children would have been assigned, if it's a child where the Children's Authority, in fact, deemed to be in need to be received into care, the children would be assigned what we call a CSA, a Children's Services Associate, which in effect is really a social worker. And that person is assigned to this child to monitor what is happening with this child from various levels. It is well understood that when a child is received into care by the Children's Authority, the ultimate goal is to place that child back into a family, either the family of origin or a family where the child feels quite comfortable. But as long as they remain in state care, there is a social worker that is assigned who is engaging with the school, who's engaging with the parents, ensuring that the child receives the necessary counseling and interventions required.
Excellent, excellent. I have one more question. Your submission noted that there's a lack of adequate and appropriate spaces for children at schools that are able to treat with their physical and or mental presentation. Approximately how many children under the purview of the Children's Authority are in need of places at special needs schools?
Mr. Bascom, do you have that figure on hand, or would we have to submit it in writing?
We will have to submit that in writing. I don't have it on hand at the moment. Apologies.
All right, please do. Thank you.
No problem. Then I have time for one more question, Chair. Sorry.
Please, go ahead.
Your submission notes that when children do not have the required school materials, Children's Social Services Associates solicit donations from staff or approach NGOs or businesses to have the materials sponsored. Are these donations adequate to meet the needs of the students?
Member Naked, it would be difficult to say fully if it is completely adequate. We are definitely seeking to fill a need. So once as staff, we, either pool our resources or seek resources, we are seeking to provide the materials that the child may need for that particular term, copybooks, pencils, pens, and so on and so forth. And so as needed, we continue to try to source the relevant materials and provide to them.
Well, I commend you all, first of all, because I know how our teachers are very responsive to the students, and they usually use their own resources. So first of all, I commend all of you. But my question to you is, does that burden upon the teachers, I mean, has that been in any way indicated to the Ministry of Education? That financial burden that is placed upon when staff, they have to ante up and help with the books and with the equipment and all of that for the students. Do you indicate such to the Ministry of Education or the relevant authority?
I don't think we have done so formally, but in various instances, in our engagement with the various schools, they will know, the teachers and the principals would know when we ourselves are part of providing relevant materials.
Again, I commend you, Mr. Bascom, Mrs. Lewis, and I thank you for taking my questions.
Thank you, Member Naked. We have a question from the viewing and listening audience to the Children's Authority. Is there a time frame as to instructing these institutions that, one, an inspection was done and found not within the procedures, and have they shut down and they have to shut down or another building, etc., with all procedures intact? Is there a time frame for that kind of transition or advice to the institution?
Chair, if I may respond to this question again, I just want to repeat, the Children's Authority does not have that purview over early childhood centers. So we would not engage.
Okay. I'm sorry, I think it was for education. That is my mistake. Going back to one of Member Naked's questions earlier, Mrs. Lewis, have you, and based on our conversation with the Education Ministry, given the legal remit of the Children's Authority, have you received any formal information about neglect or abuse at the private or public early childhood care institutions from the Education Ministry in the last 3 to 5 years?
Chair, please permit me. I would have to seek some time to clearly research. But what I could say is that we do receive reports from a wide range, from various ministries, from agencies, from private persons. We do get those reports. As to those coming directly from the Ministry of Education, I would ask for your indulgence for us to submit that via written submission.
That's fine. Have you, at the authority, had cause to investigate reports of abuse and or neglect at any of the private early childhood care institutions in the past few years, given that the Education Ministry has indicated that approximately 50%, there are concerns about their operations of about 50% of the private institutions and the ones that may be unregistered and have not come to the attention of the Education Ministry. Because one would imagine that, for example, the child that died at the swimming pool scenario years ago may have been an issue that may have been reported to you or not. I would shudder to think that you didn't respond, so not. But have there been those kinds of reports emanating from early childhood care centers, either public or private, to the authority?
So, certainly, Chair, we do receive reports of abuse of children within early childhood centers.
Are they prevalent or profound reports, or are they sporadic reports?
At this time, Chair, I do not want to mislead anyone, so I would again ask for us to submit that in writing. But what I can share this time is that whenever a report is received, we do investigate. It goes through our normal channels, so it is documented, it is assigned, depending on the severity of the abuse as we would have assessed. It goes through various channels. So it may be, if it's extremely high, we send it through our emergency response team and they would conduct an initial and immediate investigation. If not, it goes If not, it goes to our investigation and intervention unit, of which Mr. Bascom right here is a manager for a section, and they would investigate and determine the next course of action.
Without the specificity of that the data may provide, is the authority at all concerned about the unregulated nature of the early childhood care sector, given the amount of reports you may or may not receive? Is there a concern there? Because you may have a general sense that more and more reports are coming out of either neglect or abuse in the early childhood care sectors in Trinidad and Tobago.
Chair, certainly. Any report of any abuse of a child is a concern for the authority, but even more so when it is coming from an early childhood center. And so we too recognize the need for us to move quickly and urgently into stringent measures and ensure that there are regulation and legislation that governs those centers as well.
Thank you. We're going to move now. Thank you so much, Children's Authority. We may come back to you in a short while. I'm going to go to Member Singh now, and we will engage the Tobago House of Assembly Division of Education, Research and Technology. Thank you for being patient, Tobago. Member Singh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning again, colleagues from the THA. I want to also thank you for the quite extensive responses you would have provided to this committee. So in reflecting in your responses, I have a couple of questions that I may pose. So let me get into it. In terms of your submissions, your submission mentions that the division needs the power to register, monitor, and license ECC centers in Tobago. The submission also mentions that this process begins in Tobago. My question is, what is the average time taken to complete the registration of an ECC center in Tobago and for the award of a license to operate?
Right, good morning. So Mrs. Lorraine George, you will take that, or ECC manager?
Good morning, Mr. Singh. Trust that you're hearing me well. So it is quite difficult to say how long the process will take, because what happens is just to be outlined in the written there. When that all those agencies have given approval and the forms have been cleared for us, the school supervision unit will do the inspection. This goes to Trinidad. After that, I don't know how long it takes. I am not sure where in Trinidad it goes and how long that process takes for someone to receive registration or licensing.
So could I safely say that the time factor is a clear deterrent for some of these centers becoming registered?
Yes, you can. And they have said so, many of them.
Okay. I look to your responses to question 2, item 4 on page 2. Your submission noted that the number of unregistered, unlicensed learning institutions in Tobago is unclear. I took note of the amount of ECC centers in Tobago: 12 government, 5 civil, 37 private. What I want to know is, has the THA made any attempts at establishing any formal communication with unregistered education and childcare providers?
Yes, we have. I am in this position for the last 8 years, and when I came into the position, there was major publicity asking providers so to do. We got a few responses, and after that, there was only one other call to the public asking people to come in to register, and we only got a few, which is what you see before you in the report. And
okay, so
may I add? Yeah.
Sure.
So that's part of our strategic planning process at this time. We are at the stage of reaching out to the public. So we have planned a major marketing campaign, just as I believe it was, I can't remember who mentioned it before from your committee. we are doing a major outreach and educational development program so that persons would have a sense of why they need to be registered, and parents themselves would be more knowledgeable and they would be able to select a registered ECC center rather than one that is not. So we want to do that educational campaign across the board.
But from your experience and in dealing with the Tobago situation of these unregistered, and as Senator Naked would have indicated in his response, in his questioning to the other agencies, being unregistered could be viewed as being illegal. How, in terms of your interaction with these few persons that responded to the public call, how prevalent you would say is the issue where parents are taking their children to these unregistered facilities? How prevalent, if you want to just list it by a percentage to your information in that regard, how prevalent are these unregistered facilities?
It is extremely prevalent. Let me just answer first, and then I will allow Mrs. P to. I also want to mention that while we were preparing for this project, the research team, they would have called out. We have 71 centers on record, but out of those 71, 23 are not registered. When they were trying to gather the information from the private sectors, they were extremely disrespectful. They did not feel that these standards, because they're not ratified by law, have any teeth to control them, or that we have any authority, whether we're saying it's legal or illegal, to approach them and to demand any information from them. So they were very, very disrespectful. I think it's very, very prevalent. And during the COVID period, when we were not allowed to go out to formal schools, a few of them very sporadically developed. So we are currently doing the research. We recently developed our research sector, and we're currently doing the research to gather the accurate information because we intend to be data-driven on our side. So I'll allow Mrs. Georgine to
add it to that. It would be prevalent because you can see the small numbers of government-assisted and civil sector in Tobago compared to the private. So parents choosing the private is prevalent because we are grossly overcrowded in the government system here in Tobago.
Okay, thank you for that response. Like to move to
Member Singh, just let me ask, what does overcrowded mean? What does overcrowded mean? Grossly overcrowded mean?
Well, all our centers are at their limit, and this term specifically, we've allowed them to go over by 5 because of the need.
When, for example, how many should the centers be accommodating, and how many are you actually accommodating for?
Right. So we have different sizes of centers. The largest center is 65. Then we have centers for 50, and then 45. And
so what's your overall capacity in terms of all, and how many are you actually providing services for?
Our overall capacity would be around 400 or 395 thereabout, and we are right now at 440.
And how is that impacting the provision of services for those children?
Well, it is still very good, sir, because what principals and administrators have done is remove some of our shelving to create space so that you have movement.
And you have the ratio of personnel to deal with this overcrowding? Because that's another issue.
Yes, that is one thing that the tech has regularized very early this year, September term last year. So we are at least 95 to 97% fully trained staff, and we are in every center that the government have, we have full amount of staff and still running interviews to finish the gaps, to fill
That's
up
commendable. Thank you. That's commendable. Member Singh, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Regarding your proposals to have consultation and your responses in the document to the factors and challenges which hinder the successful implementation of some of these policies and initiatives. I saw in your responses, you mentioned the issue of having a cultural resistance as a barrier. Could you kindly elaborate on this cultural resistance you're experiencing with regard to the successful implementation of some of the initiatives outlined in your program?
Right, so I will begin. So that cultural resistance would reflect both internally within our division, the tech, and externally. We would have embarked on a new strategic direction recently. So what we would have discovered was, and in any change management process, we will have some form of resistance. So persons were working very hard, but not collaborating well. That was one of the key points of focus of our internal improvement strategy. We are also looking at cultural resistance on the ground. If you do not have enough spaces in the government service to have the children, persons are going to go to auntie down the road, auntie from church, etc. It's going to be downstairs. It's not going to conform to all of the regulations and the standards, but they're comfortable with the auntie. They would also be afraid of some of the standards that would control whether or not they should be able to open a center or not. And so they would naturally resist. As I said, some of them were very disrespectful because they feel they're running a private school, they're collecting their private fees, and they have their particular way of doing things, etc. So this is why we have to make it a holistic educational program. We have to go into the villages, into the communities, talk to the fishermen, talk to the churches, etc., and let them understand what it is we are doing. We want to have greater accountability from nursery to tertiary. So we have to teach the people why it is important for us to have improved standards across the board. That is why our emphasis is now the last part of our strat plan, to go out among the people and take this knowledge to them and get feedback from them. Our intention is to work with the people within the barriers of the culture to help them to understand why we need to improve our education sector. Yes.
Thank you. Chair, just have about two more questions. I saw your submission stated that some of these privately run centers are solely responsible for their own monitoring and upkeep of their facilities, and non-compliance will be monitored by the respective agencies. The question is generally, what issues have been identified by these respective government agencies that have been brought to your attention thus far?
Well, pretty similar to what the ministry would be experiencing in Trinidad. So most of the time, and it is case-by-case basis, especially if the issue is a health one, then the Division of Health will be called in. And most of the time, that calling in is done community-wise, because people would not really report to the Division of Education, because as Ms. Second was trying to, was explaining about our culture, that is how they understand it. They're private, so they're not government. So we're not going to the division. If it's a private, then we're going to see. If it is a health problem, we go to health. If it's otherwise, they look for the relevant people to deal with it. So hence the reason we have not had in the last couple of years any reports.
Yes, and if I could just add, the same infrastructural issues, the physical capacity of the building, where they are having the children, feeding, applications, etc.
And a follow-up to that, in when you all are dealing with the inspections, is the granting of access to the THA officials for the purpose of this same conducting of inspections a condition for attaining registration status in Tobago?
Yes, and so in Tobago, to me, it seems the private providers see a major condition or requirement being with school feeding. So they want the school feeding for the children they are providing for, and therefore they will come in, because for us, they must start the registration process. And we say start because of what I explained earlier, the channels that it has to take and how long it takes to come back to them as being registered or licensed. So we say in the division, we must start the process, meaning you got the forms, you go to the government agencies, got the approvals, brought it back, and we have inspected and sent off. So once they have done that, then the administrator and the school feeding team department will look into it and see if they will qualify. So that is one of the major things that invite them to come in and comply. You're muted. We're not hearing you.
You're muted, Member Singh.
Thank you. Sorry for that. Chair, and my last question would be at the monitoring side, in terms of the operational ECC centers from the THA Education Division side of things, how many of these facilities have had severe issues that the THA had to intervene? And I'm not sure if close down the facility or monitor and regulate. Have you had any instances of any of these facilities having problems and issues or incidents in, let's say, the last couple of years, last 3 to 5 years, and what was done?
Very similar to the Ministry of Education. We can't close down, or we don't close down, but we can go to the Division of Health. We haven't had any such in the last 5 years. Privately, before the 5-year period, we heard of one situation where the child got burnt at a place that was preschool and daycare in one. So at that center, the Division of Health went in and closed them for a while to investigate, and they reviewed it. But coming from our end, we don't close down. And then you asked about monitoring. It's similar to what the ministry says. Once we are invited, or when we have training sessions, we throw out the invitation. Many times it's a very few. The numbers will show you the number of private providers, and out of that number, if we get 5 private people coming and tapping into the training, we get plenty. So they don't really invite us to monitor because they know what they're doing. But for this specific purpose, when we went out, we were able to see a lot and give a lot of advice and talk to people and help them understand, and many of them were receptive. You're mute again. Remember, you're mute.
Chair, I know I said that we last, but I just have one more question to close off my questioning. And it has to do with the ability of the ECC curriculum and the need to be more inclusive to children with special needs. Are students with special needs currently integrated into the ECC classrooms in the government and government-assisted ECC schools in Tobago?
All right, we both answer. So yes, as one of our key focus points for the tech with our strat plan is inclusivity. So we want inclusivity from early childhood all the way up. The children are integrated. We have a strong student support services sector that works along with our nutrition sector to make sure that the kids are diagnosed and references are made so that we can ensure that there is a smooth, seamless transition. Now, there are some children, I think somebody mentioned it before, who are not in the system. They are at home. They're not registered. They're not right. So our research department, which I said is recently developing, we are going out into the communities. We are hunting these families down, and we are helping to integrate them into our formal education sector, because we do have kids out there who are not registered.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Member Singh. Thank you very much, Tobago, for being so prepared. I want to go back to the Education Ministry for just a bit. We have a question. The question earlier was really for the Education Ministry. And the question is there a time frame as to instructing institutions that an inspection was done and found not within, and your organization found not within compliance, that they have to shut down or move to another building? Is there a time frame that's given to this organization to become compliant and guidelines?
I will take the question, Chair. In terms of notification for non-compliant institutions, we would often get those in public health, and there's a time frame in which persons are required to get their institution up to the quality standard or to address the needs or issues outlined in the notice from public health. As we would have mentioned.
The other question I have is, and it really stuck with me, and I don't want to hold you to it because you really give me an approximation of the 600, the 50% thereabouts, even if it's 40% to me, 40% of non-compliant in the private sector institutions is of great concern. If that is the case, let's just say on the lower end, it's 40% that are generally non-compliant. Is there an understanding or an identification by the ministry that as we move toward the draft policy, changing the regime legislatively, that these institutions will by law have to become compliant, and they may be serving as much as 20,000 or more children to help provide capacity building to these institutions to move them into what will be an inevitable legislative regime that they will be mandatory?
So, Chair, as mentioned, there is going to be it's being proposed that there will be a moratorium which will allow these institutions to really come up to standards. And even before the amendment, as was indicated, the policy for the registration of private schools in Trinidad and Tobago, that policy does make and put forward specific guidelines that schools are supposed to abide by.
But there are unregistered schools presently that are off the radar of the Education Ministry and I'm presuming the Children's Authority, because they are just not on the radar. For example, the school that had the incident where the child died, that was publicized about a year and a half ago. And the concern about those types of institutions that are off the radar and operating, in addition to the registered ones at about 40–50% that are partially or wholly non-compliant, leaves quite a significant gap for shortfall and unsafe environments and unsatisfactory delivery of services. What are we doing about that in the meantime? What is the plan to get those in line even before the law comes and a moratorium has to extend substandard operations at some level and force them into compliance? There must be some plan, I'm presuming, to deal with the registered ones who are non-compliant, or are we just accepting that as well? That's how it is.
Okay, Chair, so we are addressing it. We continue to liaise with those persons to get them up to quality standards at this point in time. Again, once the Act, we have that policy document as well as we have the revision of the Education Act. Once the Education Act comes into, is revised to include ECC, of course, definitely the Ministry of Education would have also greater autonomy in addressing the shortfalls of the unregistered as well as registered private institutions. But we continue to work along with them to educate them, to get them registered or to meet the standards.
This is an insensitive comparison, but I'll use it nonetheless. The reason for the preponderance of registered, non-compliant, or unregistered is because of a shortfall in capacity in the state side. Are there plans to expand the state provision of services of ECC centers throughout the country? I didn't bother with the analogy. I'll get roasted for it.
So, Chair, normally in terms of the expansion, we would look at the information that comes out of the census or the survey of living conditions, as well as the establishment of communities, whether through HDC or LSA. And based on those reports, we do identify sites and areas for expansion in terms of ECCE.
Would you have a sense of how many those are moving to the next 2-3 years?
I can't say at this point in time, Chair, but we can submit a written response.
Is there a standardization of school fees for the private registered centers?
No, there isn't.
So they can charge whatever they want?
Yes,
Is there a guide? Is it part of your guideline, at least? Fee structure?
No, it isn't.
Do your guidelines include nutrition requirements, sanitation requirements?
Yes. Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
And how do you monitor that? With your visits?
Yes.
Okay. We're just about 5 minutes before, so we're going to hope to close up at 12 noon. We want to thank you all for your participation. I'm going to invite the leads of each of the 3 stakeholder groups before us to provide closing comments, and you can again submit any additional information that you've promised or you think is relevant to the inquiry to the Secretariat, and we greatly appreciate that. I'll start with Dr. Smith at the Education Ministry, please.
Okay, so thank you very much. We want to thank the committee for providing us with the opportunity to share with the general public what is taking place within the ECCE sector. And we do look forward to the amended act, as well as the registration of private schools in Trinidad and Tobago. And we want to encourage parents, even as they make that decision to send their children to an ECCE center, please contact the Ministry of Education to ensure that you are sending your child to a registered center. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the board and staff and the Children's Authority, I want to thank you for allowing us to be part of this discussion, which for me was very fruitful and insightful. The Children's Authority is very concerned, always very concerned when we have any abuse of children, and we recognize that our ECC centers is one of those places where children can be abused. And so we will continue to work very closely with the Ministry of Education and other stakeholders to ensure the safety of our children in Trinidad and Tobago. So thank you again, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Second at the Assembly.
I want to say thank you on behalf of our Chief Secretary and our Secretary for Education and the team at DIRTEC. Thank you for inviting us to be part of this engagement. We look forward to continue working and collaboration with all of the members here. And we are looking forward to, most of all, those solid amendments in our Education Act that will actually give us teeth so we can go in. Whatever we do not monitor does not get done. So we are grateful for the opportunity, and we say thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank all of you for being here with us today. We'd like to thank all stakeholders who participated in today's deliberations, the committee members for their continued support and participation, and the staff of the Office of the Parliament and our Secretariat for your procedural and logistical support. And to the viewing and listening audience, thank you all for your comments, questions, and for viewing. On behalf of the committee, I'm Paul Richards, the chairman. Thank you for viewing, and do have a safe afternoon.